Welcome to Vancouver's first and only unapologetically progressive public affairs program with your hosts, David Benedictus and Daria Ruggles.
Good morning. Welcome back to CoolCouve. My name is David Benedictus.
Good morning and welcome back. I'm Daria Ruggles.
And this morning, we're speaking with Don Steinke, a local community advocate of many years here in Clark County.
Welcome, Don. We're happy to have you. So everybody, I just want to very quickly read. Don has a wonderful background, and I'm just going to give it to you real quick so you know exactly who is running for PUD. Don Steinke taught science and math, mostly at Fort Vancouver and Camas High Schools. Starting in 2013, Don and his wife, Alona, led the grassroots effort to stop the largest oil train terminal in North America and won. Yay! Don says that on his tombstone, he'd like it to say, he fought big oil and he won. And we want to join you in that fight, Don. That's a worthy fight. So the Yakama Nation and the Quinault Indian Nation were both adamantly opposed to all coal and oil headed through their turf. And the Steinkes were invited to events by both tribes and recognition of their help in defeating 5 oil companies. Good job. They also received a letter of appreciation from the Standing Rock tribe for helping to temporarily stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. Do you see, everybody, why I need to read this? This is big stuff. The Steinke's strongest partners in that were, oh, excuse me, Don, I might need a correction here, that you worked with climate legislation in Olympia. And can you correct that? There's some, I got a little.
After I have Dakota Access Pipeline, in my notes, I have the Steinke's strongest partners in that work were Columbia River Keepers, Sierra Club, Friends of the Columbia Gorda, and Washington Environmental Council. The Steinkes also worked recently to help pass climate legislation in Olympia. And largely because of the Steinkes, the city of Vancouver adopted a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030 community-wide. Don is on the committee working on that, which brings us to why Don is running for the Board of Commissioners for Clark Public Utilities. And that's where I go.
Oh, perfect. Yes, you do. And this is all being recorded, and I think it's charming, and I'm not going to change it. So please go right to answering that question, Don. Tell us why you are running.
Okay, so thanks, David and Daria, and hello to our audience. Back in 1990, George H.W. Bush said if he was elected, he would fight climate change. What happened? In general, he was dissuaded by the fossil fuel companies to take meaningful action. Elected officials in general everywhere have dozens of issues to contend with. They cannot have in-depth understanding of more than a few. Fortunately, furthermore, at the local level, elected officials think that climate change needs to be reserved for the national level, Congress. But it wasn't until 2017 that I realized Congress would never act because there are too many senators from coal and oil states, such as Senator Joe Manchin. I was recruited by the Sierra Club National to lead a campaign at the local level for emissions reduction. Already, approximately 150 cities have passed ambitious targets for emissions reduction, such as Seattle, Eugene, and Portland. As mentioned in the introduction, largely because of my work over 7 years, the city of Vancouver in late 2020 finally adopted a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030 community-wide. I'm on the official committee working on that. It soon became clear to me that it will be impossible for that goal to be reached unless Clark PUD plays a role. They need to prepare for electric fleets, such as fleets of UPS, FedEx, Amazon, Waste Connections, electric school buses, electric police cars, electric transit, and hundreds of contractor fleets serving the construction and remodeling industries, such as plumbers. Not only does Clark PUD need to plan for the charging infrastructure, they need thousands of solar panels to provide the clean energy. Clark PUD is not anticipating this. They also do not appear at all to recognize the urgency of taking climate action. So that's why I'm running for the PUD Commission of District 2.
Well, thank you very much.
So tell us about the PUD. Why is that important? Why is that position important and to the community and around these issues of emission reduction and reaching our goals by 2030?
Well, first of all, the Clark PUD is owned by us, the public. We own it, and we elect 3 commissioners to oversee them to make sure they don't waste money. But they have wasted money in the past by making bad decisions. And one of the ways I'll keep rates down is to try to help them avoid bad decisions. And we know one that they're about ready to make tomorrow or soon. And so in general, the commissioners seem to act as though climate change doesn't matter. In fact, the one I'm running against said, when I asked her point blank in a commission meeting, do you agree with the national assessment that climate change is urgent and that it is hurting our economy and it's going to get worse and is caused by the burning of fossil fuels? The incumbent I'm running against said, I think our legislature has more important things to be doing than fighting climate change. Now, she's been in office for 29 years. This is her 30th year. And we need to start, and I'm in her district, and you have to live west of I-205 and south of 4th Plain all the way through to Camas and Washougal to be in the right district to actually run for that spot. And I'm the only one that's interested in running and capable of running in that spot. And I think that they might have trouble finding even Republicans to run against me, although this is a nonpartisan race. And so the Clark PUD has a big role to play because they need to start planning for the infrastructure for all this charging stuff. For example, Southern California Edison, a big utility there, has planned to spend $300 million, not for electric trucks, but to provide charging stations for electric trucks. Now, Clark PUD is not doing that at all, although they just started a program about a year ago for electric vehicle program, and their staff tries to do a pretty good job, but the whole culture at the PUD, other than those 2 people at the PUD that are supportive, the whole culture there is natural gas is no problem. It doesn't cause climate. It's much better than the alternative being coal, but it turns out not to be much better than coal. And we can't afford that anymore. It's already too late. We've already crossed points where climate change is going to be unstoppable. And we can't save everything, but let's save what we can. And we can't do the whole world, but let's do Clark County.
Right, John. So
Can I just ask, oh, I'm sorry, Gary. So could you say more about gas and
yes,
why that's an issue? My reading, what I've read is that it's linked to more methane release and affecting the ozone, things like that. Is that what it's about?
A number of things. Gas wells and oil wells both produce methane. Methane is the main ingredient in natural gas. In Europe, they don't use the word natural gas. They use the word methane, or methane is how they pronounce it in England. And methane, when it leaks and goes into the atmosphere, is 86 times as bad as CO2 for the first 20 years. And the first 20 years are the most critical for saving places like Texas and Florida and California and India and Hong Kong and low-lying places. The next 20 years is the most important. The next 10 years is more important. So we cannot be leaking methane. And it has been recently discovered, wasn't discovered until very recently, that there are 3 million gas wells that have been abandoned in America for a number of reasons. Some of them are just abandoned because the market's they don't get enough money for it, so they just walk away from it, and it's leaking methane. And it costs $20,000 at a minimum to plug that up to stop it from leaking methane. And it could cost up to $200,000 depending on the location of that leaking well. And the Biden administration has planned to spend $16 billion in the infrastructure plan that's bipartisan, spending $16 billion to find those wells, because they're not all leaking, find the ones that are leaking and plug them up. So the taxpayers are subsidizing what the screw ups of the oil industry and the gas industry. And the PUD is right in the middle of that because we have a gas burning power plant on River Road at the Port of Vancouver at Terminal 5. And also anybody that calls a PUD and said, I would like to convert my gas water heater to an all-electric heat pump, the PUD is likely to tell them, no, gas is better.
Wow.
There
Okay.
is- Yeah, whoa.
Yeah. So, this is a great time then to talk, Don, about let's talk about good energy and what your vision for PUD is.
Okay, so what Clark PUD needs to do is provide two things: the infrastructure for charging, and they also need to provide the energy to supply those things, because I believe there could be a huge demand. In fact, one fleet operator already approached the PUD, and the PUD said, yeah, we can hook you up, but you have a limit on how much you can have. And so what if there's another company coming in? Is there going to be enough electricity for them? And according to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, it's a quasi-federal organization, they recommend that the region creates, in the next 5 years, 3.5 gigawatts of renewable energy, such as solar and wind. And Clark County's share out of that for our region based on population would be about 320 of the community solar farms we have at Padden Road and 117th at their operations facility, the PUD there. They have a bunch of solar panels there. And we would need 320 of them just to meet our fair share of those targets. Now, the PUD might say, well, we'll let BPA do that, but I think we need to do it right here. Doing it right here makes us resilient. If there's an earthquake and knocks down those power lines coming from elsewhere, we have it right here, and ideally on every school, so we have resiliency in our community when there's a big earthquake.
So tell us why it's not just better for the environment, but why is it better for business?
Well,
Good question.
the cost of, first of all, the Clark PUD has no ability to affect the rates. Basically, they're just passing through what's charged to them, and they get charged by BPA, and they also get charged by the pipeline company that brings the gas down from about 1,000 miles north of here, from northern British Columbia and Alberta. And so that pipeline company, their rates fluctuate, and we can't control them. And we get 1/3 of our electricity from that right now, mainly in the summertime, or mainly when there's low water in the Columbia River. And so that's one issue. But why is it good for business? That's a new question for me to think about. First of all, business is going to be affected dramatically as climate change gets worse and worse. It's already hurting our economy. It's cost about $110 billion a year in America for various sectors, for extreme weather events. So it's the cheapest way to avoid economic catastrophe.
So when is the election, and how long is the term? A little bit more about PUD. I was trying to search for the election for PUD on the internet today, and it was kind of hard to find that information. So when's the election? How long is the term of office, and who can vote in that election?
Thank you, Dave. In general, if there's a primary election, only the top two move forward. And if there's, in other words, if there's two or more candidates only come May 30, May 20, if there's only two candidates, then there will be no primary. It'll just go straight to the general election, which is around early November, same as always. But if there's three or more candidates. Then there's will be a primary election, and the only people that can vote on that will be those who live east of 205 and south of Fourth Plain, including Camas and Washougal. That's a general, it's a wiggly line, but that's a general line. So the only body that can vote on that will be those people who live in that part of the county for the primary election. And so then the people in that district get to choose their top two, and then those top two will move to the general election. And so did I get those questions, Dave?
Well, so you're talking about districts, right? So there are other commissioners in other.
There are three commissioners,
Yeah.
and one represents the core area of Clark County, like the city and west of 205 and
Right.
and Fruit Valley and Salmon Creek. And then Jim Malinowski represents the northern part of the county, which would be La Center, Ridgefield, Battleground, and Amboy and Yakult,
Mhm.
and the unincorporated parts there.
So, Don, David and I were saying earlier, it's like, this seems like a no-brainer to have you. You have an unimpeachable record and credibility. What you're offering is incredibly healthy and good for a visionary Vancouver. It's good for business, but you might have some opposition. So who do you think is likely to oppose you and why?
Well, thanks for asking that. I believe that the oil and gas industries would rather I not get elected. They know me well. We've been on the opposite sides at the City of Vancouver advocating, at the Port of Vancouver advocating, and they spent $32 million against the campaign I helped lead in 4 years ago, ballot measure 1631, or maybe it was 2018. And so they spent $32 million trying to defeat the ballot measure that we now got passed in law in the legislature, which is called the Climate Commitment Act, which is another conversation. But I'm thinking that that's my greatest fear. They will pour money into the campaign, and they'll try to recruit somebody to run against me. The incumbent that I'm opposing, she might seek support from those people too. I don't know. She'd like to get support from the business community, which is connected to the Chamber of Commerce, and the biggest players in the Chamber of Commerce are the fossil fuel companies here in Vancouver, or they're big players. And so I don't know who will oppose me, but the incumbent is likely to oppose me. And I think she's the only one that has somewhat ability and has, because she's an incumbent for 29 years, that might make it an advantage to her base. But if she decides not to run, if she decides that I cannot be beat, then, which I'm hoping, but then the oil and gas companies might recruit somebody to run against them, but they're for sure likely to find somebody to run against the next candidate 2 years from now, when the next position is open. These are 6-year terms. So every 2 years, a new commissioner's seat is up.
I just wanted to go back to that. You were referring then to the incumbent, Nancy Barnes, who made that comment about the legislature, that the city didn't really, that Clark County or rather the state legislature had more pressing problems than climate change to address.
Right.
And I see that the city of Vancouver has on their website, this is a climate crisis. So there seems to be a disconnect there between municipalities doing something and what PUD and what she's thinking about the legislature and the state. What is that? How do you make sense of that?
Well, there is no sense. Now, this was what Commissioner Barnes said about 4 years ago when I asked her a direct question. And when I asked her that same question about 5 months ago, she would not say anything, and neither would the other person on the commission who I'm not running against. Who she didn't say anything either, because they didn't want to have anything used against them. And Commissioner Malinowski said yeah, climate change is important. We just don't know how we're going to get there. And I'm thinking, let's do what we can. The first thing we could do is build 320 community solar farms.
Ooh.
And the city of Vancouver, what really gave me a leg up in my advocacy there is our legislature passed a goal. The legislature passed a goal about 2 years ago. This was after my initial conversation with Commissioner Barnes. The legislature passed an initial goal, a revised goal actually, of reducing emissions 50% statewide by 2030 and 95% by 2045. So I thought to myself, okay, Vancouver, let's work on supporting that. So they agreed with me. In fact, some of the commissioners, council members said, we need to do more faster. And she said that after the heat dome event, when people were dying last summer from the heat, and even in British Columbia, we cannot escape there. There was the heat dome had killed people up there too. And so that changed the conversation at the city council. It was like, can we afford to do this? And now it was, let's do everything we can. Let's go all in.
Because we can't afford not to.
Right. And so, yeah, there's a disconnect. And when our mayor showed up at the PUD meeting urging them to do broadband, the commissioner sort of brushed her off. Or they just said, well, we can't do that, or something to that effect. And broadband is something that I think is really important for everybody, particularly in the time of COVID. And it will take a lot of vehicles off the road if they don't have to drive from Battleground to do work that they could do from home on a laptop, if they had good broadband service. But my policy advisor on broadband is Christo Bobbin, and he's got a plan that may not need the PUD involvement, but time will tell on that. I'm thinking that we need to have a discussion at the PUD about broadband, at least have a discussion about it, but I don't know where we'll land after we have that conversation.
Well, going back to the business, what's the incentive for business? Businesses have endorsed effective access broadband for their employees because they just realized through this pandemic that most people want to work from home, and also the power of digitalizing their products. They're shifting a lot of their energy into digitalization and hiring people that have those skills, which then takes people off the freeways and the highways, and because they're staying away from the city centers and they're working from home. I mean, this is a real thing that they're looking, this is a trend. So you're right on there, I think, in terms of talking about broadband as being one. People don't think about digitalization as a green process. I mean, it can be ungreen if you're using power, to generate the power. So we need to electrify and all that, but digitalization is a huge part of that.
Yes, and getting back to what's in it for business, if you go to the Hewlett-Packard website, their website sounds just like, they talk just like me. And Frito-Lay wants charging stations. Amazon, UPS ordered thousands of delivery trucks, all electric, but they can't get them yet, but they want them as soon as they can. And then they're going to need charging stations. And the business community is a lot more on board than the city council is. Pardon me, not the city, the PUD. The business community, some of the business community anyway, is more on board than the PUD. The Port of Kaminista-Washougal wanted the PUD work with the PUD on community solar on their airport at the Port of Kaminista-Washougal. PUD was not interested. Clark County wanted to talk with the PUD about having solar panels on top of their giant landfill that's been covered, and PUD was not interested. Port of Vancouver wants to have solar panels all over their acres of roof on their warehouse there, and Clark PUD doesn't seem that interested in that. And so the business community is moving in this direction. Not everybody all at once. And of course, the last ones to do it would be the would be the fossil fuel industries. And they will talk like they are green out of one side of their mouth, but then the other side is just the opposite. And I could talk forever about that.
We totally understand, Don. And I think that I would like to know, first of all, who has endorsed you? Again, this seems like common sense. You have all of the credibility in the background. I'd like to know a little bit about who has endorsed you, and then how people can support you, please.
I think I had a number of elected officials endorse me before I even told anybody I was running.
I think that's being called recruited.
And they donated so big. It's humbling, actually. The two commissioners, commissioner of Port of Vancouver, two of them there, and one commissioner at the Port of Kaminista-Washougal endorsed me before they knew I was running and donated. And then since then, other elected officials have endorsed me, or like about 8 elected ones. So Diana Perez and Kim Harless at the City Council, and Mike D'Alessandro on the City Council and Mayor of Battleground. But I thought he moved, but he endorsed me too. And then there's an elected official, a former elected official, Thurston County PUD, or is it Pierce? I can't remember. I think it's Thurston County PUD. He endorsed me. And then the former mayor of Camas endorsed me. And there are others that I can't, let me think. Those are the ones that come to mind right now, but I have 8 current elected officials and 8 former elected officials. Another one is a commissioner at the Port of Olympia. The former commissioner at the Port of Olympia has endorsed me. And I had a number of them endorse me before I announced. And then on my website, I have about over 100 people that are not elected officials submit comments of endorsement. And I've raised $19,000 so far for the campaign. Wow. And the election's not till later. And my hope is I don't disappoint anybody.
Oh, Don, I don't think you will. Tell us how people can support you.
Well, go to my website, and Daria will give it to you. And I don't have it at the top of my head, but you can't search for it. You actually have to know the URL, because we made it so Google wouldn't find me. We didn't want the oil and gas companies to find my campaign sooner than necessary, because we didn't want to have them. I know they're more likely to run misinformation about me. They do that all the time about everybody. And Tim Probst, when he ran 6 years ago for the legislature, his opponent, Linda Wilson, the people that wanted her to win instead of Tim Probst, according to Tim Probst, they raised $1 million to run against him. And that's just for 1/3 of Clark County in the legislature. And they don't necessarily give the money to the candidate, but they do it in advertising. That's called in-kind contribution. So they will advertise against the incumbent, against one candidate and for another candidate, or against one position. And in Clark County, if they do, they already, I think I know who's actually going to put an editorial in the Columbian saying we cannot transition off of fossil fuels. We need gas, and it's going to hurt families if we try to wean off. What are we going to do if we have a power failure? I've already seen their arguments. They've been doing it for years. I've been watching them in the legislature, the same old stuff. We care about the climate and we want to reduce emissions, but this bill won't be effective. It's just going to hurt families. And we could have power outages and there could be people freezing in the dark. That's a type of argument that they're going to say.
So that's a great segue to my next question, which is, so how advanced and affordable our solar panels, because what we're talking about is building out the electrical grid with solar panels, and then how vulnerable, then the follow-up would be how vulnerable, what is this idea about the vulnerability to severe climate, or the Pacific Northwest, you don't get enough sun and those kind of things.
I'm so glad you asked that question, and I have a much better answer today than I would have had last Thursday morning. But Thursday morning, I listened to a presentation by two of our best people at the PUD, Matt Babbitts, who's in charge of electric vehicle program and the community solar program, and Bart Hansen, who's in charge of the residential solar, rooftop solar program, and rooftop solar. And so he begins by, Bart Hansen on the PUD staff begins by saying, if you're going to do something more than 100 kilowatts, you'll be talking to Matt Babbitts. That's the large project. But if it's 100 kilowatts or less, you'll be talking to Bart Hansen. That's the kind of the dividing line. And they talked about how the price of solar has come down about 60% since they began working on this in 2014. And so the price has come down dramatically, but it already had come down dramatically before that. And so, and believe it or not, Exxon brought it down a whole lot in the 70s, because the only one that could afford to do it, put solar anywhere, was the on satellites. They needed to have the best solar possible, and Exxon made it about 40% better way back in the mid 70s, but that's another story. And so today, since basically any industry that's new gets cheaper as people gain experience. It's a common law. It's called Wright's Law, W-R-I-G-H-T law. You Google it, and basically any industry, with solar panels, the price of solar drops about 40% every time the number made is doubled. And the price of electric car batteries drops about 20% every time the number made is doubled. And each industry has its own rate of cost reduction. And so the way to bring down the cost is to do more of it, and people learn by doing. For example, the coolest thing I've seen is, instead of going up on a roof and assembling solar panels one by one like they did on the Memorial Coliseum or the event center in Portland, instead of hauling them up to the roof and assembling them there, they assemble them in the parking lot and use a crane to lift the whole batch right up there at one time. That keeps people off the roof, making holes in the roof and that sort of stuff. Now that won't work so much on small projects, but on things like warehouses, it's a great cost-saving measure. And it's been figured out that in Los Angeles, if every parking lot had shade over the cars, and that shade was a solar panel, they would have more electricity than they needed for all of Los Angeles County.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so the price of solar is going down and will continue to go down because of Wright's Law, but it takes longer because you have to double the number made. So how many were made last year? Double it next year. Or as soon as it's doubled again next year, then the cost is likely to come down 40%. And so that's why electric cars, the best ones to buy are the ones that are used, because for example, my electric car, I leased it. It was $32,000 when I bought it, or when I leased it. But when I bought it at the end of the lease, it was only $10,000, and it's still a fantastic car. But the reason why the price came down is because the newer cars have bigger batteries, and the battery is the most expensive part of the car. And by the way, the 5 top scientists in America happen to be working in the state of Washington in the Northwest National Lab in the Tri-Cities area, and their specialty is battery research. And so they're going to help bring the cost of batteries down. And so this is going to, at some point soon, the electric vehicle industry is going to explode. And we need to get ready for it. and not be caught with our pants down, so to speak.
That's wonderful, Don. And, you know, I feel like this is all so reasonable again, and such good information here. Do you want to speak a little bit about the role of PUD as it relates to the future of like multifamily developments and sidewalks and pavements, and how do you see PUD responding to the future needs?
Well,
If
actually,
you're elected.
thank you. That's part of the vision, but it has to start with the city council. Like I mentioned, that I'm part of the city council's official committee working on
Climate action policy.
on the policy to reduce emissions 50% by 2030. And I learned this information from Sean Deniston, who is a consultant for the city of San Jose, California, but he happens to live in Vancouver, but he works for San Jose. And so here's what they're doing in San Jose. You should not pour pavement in new parking lots unless before you put the pavement down, you have the conduit for electric car charging stations in multifamily developments. So the first thing to do is stop making the problem worse, because if you pour that pavement first, it's going to cost $6,000 extra for every parking spot in a multifamily development to have a plug going out to their car at their spot. And so we need to do that, but the Clark PUD will need to provide services for that in some way or another. And then same way with solar. Every new building should be designed at least to hold the weight of the solar panels, and better yet, to have conduit in the walls. Because if you want to put solar panels on your roof, and that meant you have to tear up the walls to put in conduit to get to your meter box, that's going to be a disincentive. You're not going to be too enthusiastic about doing that. You're going to say, I don't want to spend that money on having all those contractors tearing up the walls, putting in that conduit and having it running through my nice kitchen. Not such a good idea. And so those are barriers to these solutions, and Clark PUD needs to play a role in that. And I think the first thing I would want to do when I'm elected is to ask the Port of Vancouver to do everything they could to support the city goals in any way that they can.
Maybe everybody doesn't know, but oil and gas industry is subsidized by the taxpayers. They subsidize that. We give money so that they pay lower amounts for development of their plants and stuff like that. So I've heard, and I want to check with you, that the carbon tax would help shift that, and that money could be used for the development of the green energy system, and that would just explode the jobs that were available worldwide and locally. So is that carbon tax one of the most effective ways to shift the?
Yes, I'm really, really, really excited about that bill. It's not called a carbon tax. It's called the Climate Commitment Act. It passed about
Climate Commitment Act.
Climate Commitment Act, and it passed about 10 months ago. And it's okay. So it is basically what California has in their cap and trade program, but it's much more ambitious, much more accelerated. So they started their cap and trade program under Schwarzenegger about 13, 14 years ago. But they had a slow process for moving into that cap and trade program. And we're being much more ambitious here. And in 2023, it will automatically raise the price of gas to the distributors 15%. Well, it won't do it by law, but by law, they're going to be required to buy clean energy credits from somebody. And those clean energy credits, we anticipate, will cost them enough to raise the price of gas for everybody except poor people 15% next year. And our legislator, Reuben Carlisle, and the governor's office were so smart in saying, if you qualify as a low income, they call it income qualified customer. If you qualify that and you're already on gas, then you're going to be exempt from that, or you're going to still have to pay that higher price, but you're going to receive the money paid by the wealthier people for their gas is going to be going to you. And then any extra money will be going to things like solar panels. And that every 4 years, every compliance period, that rate will go up from 15%, and it's designed to go up enough. They're going to review it every 4 years. They're going to change it so that it goes up enough so we meet our targets of 95% below 1990 levels by 2050. So they have it built in to get the job done. And and anybody who puts in gas today, and the gas industry is going to try like the dickens to get you to put in gas tomorrow, they're going to say, take out your old one, it's inefficient, pay $5,000 to get a more efficient one, and you'll be good to go. But you're going to be guaranteed to pay higher prices year after year after year, unless you're poor.
So thank you very much, Don. And we really appreciate you running for this important position, and encourage people to click on the link. Again, it'll be below in the end of the recording. And there'll also be a link to the MIT's program called NROS, where you can look at an interactive, a wonderful interactive presentation that shows you where you get the most bang for the bucks in the next 10 years in reaching the climate goals. Is it with the Climate Commitment Act, the cap and trade kind of approach? Is it with just doing electrification, with nuclear, whatever? And you can maneuver those around as a private citizen and look and get the real information. It's a fantastic interactive document. So thank you very much. And we really need to keep Vancouver and Clark County cool than we had last year.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Involved and keep encouraged, folks. Thank you very much.
So say goodbye, Don, but we're going to bring you back.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for
so
tuning in.
much.
Bye.